Thank you everyone for coming. I see quite a few of our clients have joined in. That's wonderful. Firstly, thank you so much for attending this webinar. I know we're all pretty crazy with the times we're living in at the moment, doing all sorts of crazy stuff. So thank you for everyone that's taken the time to join us this morning. I see all the clients on the side. So the reason why I wanted to run this solution, we mentioned last week in our COVID webinars that and what's happening that we're seeing is all of our customers, including ourselves, are planning is now a daily exercise. We're no longer doing it once a month, once a week. It's every single day. Now, all of you guys that I see have joined us all have planning analytics, TM1, and I'm pretty sure all of you guys are pushing the limits of it every day as you're planning for the impacts of people, of sales, of all sorts of crazy things. So one of the things that is important is that we make sure we take regular snapshots of our models. So for example, that we don't change things in the wrong scenario or overwrite the wrong information or put the wrong things in. And these things do happen. What we found is that because everyone is so stressed and so busy in this time, mistakes are happening a lot more. I've had one particular client that he's made a few mistakes, and I was talking to him about it, and he said, I'm just so stressful, and it's not usually me. I don't usually make these sort of mistakes. And so what we're finding in our planning solution is that mistakes will slip in. People will make mistakes, especially with the pressure on getting the numbers turned around so quickly. So one of the things is important is for you guys to understand your models, make sure it's documented, you understand all that. We have offered all of our customers for the month of April to have a free version of QUBEdocs. So all of you online, if you don't have it already, can have a version of this for free. Document as much of your model as you can so that during this planning process, you guys can feel safe and secure. So after this, just reach out to us and we can make sure the guys can connect with you guys and get that installed. So thank you so much for joining us this morning. Really appreciate it. Have a great Easter if I don't talk to you guys. Hope there's a little bit of chocolate bunny in there somewhere for all of us during this weekend. And I'm going to pass you guys over to the QUBEdocs team.
Thanks so much, Belinda. So welcome to the webinar, everyone. I love talking with the New Zealand customers and consultants, and of course, I used to get a chance to go visit Belinda and the team in New Zealand quite often, but these days there's not much travel going on. So I guess you know, this is what we have, which is the webinars. We're getting quite used to it. Today we're going to talk about a couple of different things. We're going to talk about documentation, which, you know, some people like me, I'm a little odd. I really like documentation. I think it's fun. Don't ask me why, but I am kind of a documentation nerd. But most people think it's kind of boring and it's kind of something you put in a drawer and it's something you don't think about too much. But when documentation really comes in handy is when you need it, and you don't know when you're going to need it. And so what we do with QUBEdocs is we make sure that we make setting up your documentation easy. We completely automate it. And then we give you the ability to, anytime you want to take a little note, or you want to annotate something, or you want to find something quickly, that your documentation isn't stuffed in a drawer, but it's always right there on top of your desk. And so our documentation, you can actually use it right in a web browser. And we find that a lot of our customers have that tab of their web browser open all day long, because it's just a quick pop over to that tab and you can use our documentation like a Google search. So we're going to talk about a number of different use cases today. Ross and I are going to present different parts of the product, and we're going to go through these 4 different use cases. And I kind of make a big deal out of this when I'm on calls, but you really only need to remember 4 things. You need to remember that we're going to allow you to explore anything in your model. Okay, so you can explore your TM1, your planning analytics models. You can search for anything you want, any relationship, any cube, any dimension, any process, any chore, any function, anything you want, you can search for it and find it using QUBEdocs. You can compare what has happened last week to what's happened this week in QUBEdocs. You can compare the differences between dev and prod. And so you can really understand the content from the perspective of, just show me what changed. Don't show me a whole big thick book of names of cubes and descriptions of dimensions. Just show me the ones that changed. I just want to take a look at what's changed. And so that's number 3. And then number 4, which is really rapidly becoming one of the most popular parts of our product, which is to describe your model. Now, if I asked Belinda, for instance, Belinda, could you describe to me how Mindful uses planning analytics internally? She would, have a short conversation with me, maybe 2-3 minutes. She'd describe how they do planning, financial planning, and different things inside of planning analytics at Mindful Software. Now, if I asked you how you would do that, you would do it as well. We give you the ability to quickly describe how your profit and loss cube works, how the accounts dimension works. Just like you would write down on a little sticky note and put it on your desk, you're going to write it right into the documentation itself. We make it really easy. So we're going to cover 4 things: explore, search, compare, and describe. And with we've got a little bit of a PowerPoint presentation, but it's only 1 slide. So here's the basic list of the things we're going to talk about today. Ross and I are going to try to really keep ourselves focused when we're talking about how to use the features and the functionality of the product, that what you're really doing is exploring. Now, the last thing I'll say before we kick it off for the demo is that there's probably some people on this phone call who don't really build the models, or they don't manage them or maintain them or do administration on them. This talk or this conversation is to show you what is possible for the people who are administering those models, and also to give you the peace of mind that whether they're working really fast and possibly making some mistakes, or they're having a hard time searching for things because the model is changing from day to day because you're doing a lot of what if forecasting or scenario modeling, with that level of pressure on that development team or that administration team, you really want to have something backing them up. And so we'll show you these use cases, but in all of these use cases, what you can be assured of is that we're taking a snapshot of every piece of metadata in your model every single day. So regardless of what happened yesterday, if there was a mistake made or if something incorrectly got uploaded, you're going to be able to see that difference right away, and you're going to be able to remediate it quickly without a lot of questions. With that, Ross, I think we're over to you. So I think I need to give you control, yeah? All right, Ross, take it away.
Okay. You see my screen okay?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to essentially run you through the core features and functionality of QUBEdocs. So if you haven't seen it before, when you first log in, this is essentially what you're going to see. And as you can see here, you can have documentation for any number of different models that you might have. You might have a sales model, an HR model, something like that in production, or you might have things like this where you have a different development model from your production model. So just for the sake of the demonstration, we're going to go into this demo production model here. And the first thing you'll be greeted with is this visual representation of your entire model. So what it's going to show you is all of the cubes within your model and all of the connections and flows of data between those cubes as well. Excuse me. So this starts what the first bullet point that Scott was talking about exploring your model. So again, you can see all of the different cubes, all of these different arrows representing different flows, and that's just a summary. We can come down here and pick a different view, and this will differentiate between process flow driven flows and rule driven flows by different colors here. So say we want to go on some exploration here. We'll pick a cube. We'll pick our PL cube here. And what that's going to do is it's now going to give you a different visualization with that PL cube at the center. You'll also be able to navigate through these different tabs. So in addition to the visual diagram, you can click through and you can see a list of dimensions, a list of rules related to this cube. Same thing with processes, views, and properties as well. So now we can see, okay, some of this information is coming from an ODBC connection. So what we can do is we can click on that arrow there, and that is going to give us information about the process driving that. And if we want to, we can see this brief description here. And if we click on that, we'll get very detailed, granular information about that process. So you get the overview here, things like a prologue and metadata comments in here, data source usernames, data type, that type of thing. You'll also, again, get a nice visual diagram of those flows. You'll get the actual process script, so the actual code underlying that process, and the data source query as well. So in just a couple of clicks and within about a minute, we went from a top-down overview of your entire model down to the actual nitty-gritty detail of one specific process down to the level of the actual code itself. So again, if we can, just to recap here, your entire model into a cube, into a process, seeing where that ODBC connection is coming from, if I can click on that, down to another click and down into the actual script. So like I said, within just a few clicks, you can explore from the very top of your model down to the very bottom very quickly. What you can also do with these visual diagrams here is you can customize them as well. So by default, it's going to show all of your cubes. But what you can do is, say you want to have a different representation. So maybe you want a representation of your model. We don't necessarily need to worry about our travel cube, and say we maybe aren't too worried about our KPIs at this point. So what we can do is we can select a couple of those, and we'll see our advanced diagram will exclude that. And we refresh our view, and now we have a completely new diagram that excludes those two cubes that we selected. So you can visualize your model in different ways with different combinations of your objects. The other thing that you can do then is come over here to the save icon, and we want to save this as a new diagram. And we'll just call it demo diagram for argument here, and we'll click OK. So now that representation of your model has been saved within QUBEdocs. And one of the things that you can do with it very quickly is it's now in this dropdown that you can access at the click of a button at any time. And it's also saved for use when we get to one of our other topics, which is the describe aspect of this. We also have, so that's explore in a nutshell. Moving on to the next one, which would be search. We do have a very powerful search feature built in. So you can search for, like Scott mentioned, you can search for dimension names, processes, things like that. So if we come in here and just use fin-year as a keyword example, we can see some cube rules that have fin-year included. And you'll also see along these tabs here some of the other object types that have that as a result. So fin-year dimension, we can see the descriptions where that pops up in there as well. We also have quite powerful advanced search. So in addition to just simple keyword searches, you can add conditional searches. Say we want to have dimensions that contain fin-year, you could add any number of conditions or different groups of conditions. So you can use and or operators to create as complex of search queries as you would like. And we do have some in here sort of by default. Cubes, processes, dimensions, chores not documented. And so you can see we've created this custom search, and you can create searches just as complex. And again, with the click of a button, you can save those. And if we search on that, you can see there's a number of different criteria. We'll get the results here as well. I'll show you another aspect of search a little bit after we get down again to that describe functionality. But the search, like I said, you can save these custom searches. You can search on any number of different aspects with any number of different operators as well. So then moving on to compare. So we have built in this change analysis tool. So you can, when we talk about snapshots, and I know Scott was talking about snapshots during his intro here, what we're talking about is at a specific point in time, we can take a snapshot of the metadata. So essentially all of the dimensions, the cubes, the processes, the chores, all of that underlying metadata. We don't actually touch your actual data, so no numbers, no specific values, anything like that. But we'll take a snapshot of what your model looks like at that particular point in time. And then you can use our change analysis tool here to compare any one of those snapshots. So we could compare 2 different versions of our production model, or what we really recommend is that you would also use QUBEdocs to document your dev models as well. And what that allows you to do is before you push changes from your dev model to your production model, you can run a comparison in here and see exactly what's different between the two. So if I run that comparison between our dev model and our production model on the same day, you can see it's pretty much the same, but we can see there's some process changes here. So we can dig into that with just a couple of clicks. Nothing was added or omitted, but we did modify some processes. So we can click into there and we'll be able to see highlighted right here exactly what changed line by line between from this process, from our dev model into our production model. So before you push any changes out into your production environment, you can run a comparison like this to make sure that all of the changes really are what you want to change before you go live with those changes. Yeah. And then before I move on to our describe function, Scott, was there something else you wanted to jump in with?
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to make a point here around change control. Sometimes it seems like a very straightforward thing to be able to manage, manage the quote unquote, the underlying data, the metadata, the stuff that runs a model. Very quickly after you get a few extra cubes and a few extra processes and you're loading data in and you've got all these reports, very quickly those process names start to elude people. One of the most common things that I hear about, and I work with consultants all over the world. We've got people in Germany and in the UK and South Africa, all over the world, and they all say the same thing. How can I make sure that I move the right process from dev into prod? Is there an easy way for you to show me just the changes? Can I see specifically which line of all of these lines of texts changed? So QUBEdocs has really been built to support those developers and those consultants to be able to quickly move through those checks that they need to have in place to make sure they don't make mistakes in production. So I just kind of want to highlight that while compare is our use case that we're talking about right now, and it's very simplistic. Imagine you were comparing last year's financial results for your entire company to this year's financial results for your entire company at the account level. There's a lot of data there. That's not the kind of thing that you want to look at, each individual line item. And that's really where the power of snapshots comes in and the power of being able to have those snapshots automated. Everything you've seen up until now, and this is an important point, no developer touched anything. Literally everything that you've seen in the documentation so far was created automatically by QUBEdocs. The next use case is going to be describe, and describe is where you start adding your metadata on top of it, where you start writing what this cube is for, give it a business description, what this dimension is for, give it a business description. We'll talk about tagging. We'll give you the ability to put little tags like this is important, or here's who owns this object, or when was the last time this dimension was audited. And we're gonna, Ross is gonna go ahead and demonstrate a feature called the document wiki. And that gives you the ability to write fully fledged documentation all on your own. And leveraging some of our secret sauce. So that's all I kind of wanted to chime in and say, Ross, but I'll let you continue on.
All right, thanks, Scott. So yeah, so moving on to that last of the 4 bullet points that Scott mentioned is describe. So what we can do is we can come in here just as an example, and we can come into our list of cubes. And you can see there's this description field here. And what we can do is come up here to our little drop down and turn on this edit tags option. And you can see these all turn blue, and now these are going to be editable. So for example, if we come down here to our balance sheet cube or BS cube, we can very quickly and easily, not quickly and easily type and talk at the same time, but you can very quickly add a short business-oriented description right in this page, and that description will stay with that balance sheet cube for the duration of as long as you're using QUBEdocs. So as long as this cube stays in the model, when you come into QUBEdocs and you navigate either to the list of cubes, you'll see the description here, or if we go specifically to that cube and focus in on that cube specifically, that description will appear here as well. And you can do the exact same thing with any of your dimensions. You can add a short description for any of your dimensions all throughout your entire model, as well as processes and chores, exact same thing. So you can go through, and it really doesn't take that long unless you have a super giant model to go through and add a brief description of every object all the way throughout your model. That way, if one of you gets lucky and wins the lotto and somebody else has to take over your model, they at least have a starting point to figure out how do all of these things relate to each other? What's the purpose of each cube? What's the purpose of each process? And we have a short description built right into the product here. The other object of describe that Scott briefly alluded to is this tagging feature. So this is one of the newer features that we've added into QUBEdocs over the last year or so. And what this allows you to do is add custom tags. And what tags are going to be used for is essentially to add another level of metadata on top of your model. So things, additional descriptions, additional data points that you wouldn't want to build into your TM1 model itself, but would be useful for additional description, additional searches, and things like that. So for example, just to throw a couple of demo examples in here, we'll say this is going to be a cube owner. And obviously that's only going to apply to a cube. And so we'll click OK. And so that might be the type of tag that you'll use over the long term. And then you can also get creative with these, and you can use them in sort of short-term fashion as well. So if we're going to this month do an audit of all of our dimensions. There we go. We can give that a name. We'll apply that to our dimensions. And there we go. So creating these tags is just that quick. It's just a couple of clicks, and you can create as many of these as you like. So then what you do, so for example, if we go back to our cubes and we open up our assets cube, for example, we can see now that that tag appears right on this page for that cube. So we'll go ahead and I'll take control of this cube. I'll be responsible for our assets cube. So now anytime you navigate to this cube page, you'll see this tag and value pair pop up. And you can do the same thing with a dimension audit. So if we say, and you can use keywords like that. So dim audit complete, we can say, okay, we've audited this dimension as part of our audit for this month. So now again, anytime you come back to this dimension, while this tag is active, you'll see that, which is nice, but really where the power comes in is in the search. So if we go search for Ross now, we can see where we applied that tag, that will show up in the search results here. Same thing with, I typed it correctly. There we go. So our dimension audit complete. So now we with that search can see all of the dimensions that we've completed our audit on. Or we can, again, use our advanced search, and we want to see all of the dimensions that don't, we can click that little not checkbox, that don't contain that tag. And we go search. And now we have a list of all of the dimensions that we have still yet to audit throughout our model. And again, you can save this search query as well. So if we come up here to, we'll click our checkbox. And we'll give that search a name, and we'll click OK. And now we've saved that search, and again, we can access it from this drop down anytime we want. Right there it is, audit completed, and we can run that search without having to recreate the logic and retype our search conditions or anything like that. Excuse me. So now we've put together a few saved things for explore, for search, and for compare. And now the other thing that Scott had alluded to is our document wiki, which is another recent development. It still says beta on here, but it is pretty fully functional. And so the knowledge bases existed previously. You have things like your business glossary in here, where you can see all the descriptions that you've created. You've got your technical glossary, and you can choose which version of TM1 or planning analytics you're using, and you'll see a list of terms here that you can search. And all of these, if you click on one, are going to take you directly to the IBM Knowledge Center page for that particular item. But what we've added recently, again, is this document wiki. And what you can do is you can build your own documents in essence. So it's similar to like a Google Docs type of thing where you can add static text, you can format text and make lists and bullet points, you can add images and logos. But really where the power comes in is in the ability to add these embed these dynamic objects. So search, diagram, checklist, and change. So just to go through those real briefly. So change report, if we wanted to embed a change report here, we click that, and we can run the same change report that we ran previously and insert that. So now while we're in edit mode in this document, you're just going to see a little bit of text here indicating that there's an embedded object there. So, and we can do the same thing. We created that custom diagram earlier in the demo. And what we can do is if we come down here and find it, we pick our demo diagram, and it will be for our current connection. And we can insert the diagram. And exact same thing with our custom search. If we want to embed that search, whoops, we do want current connection. And we had saved that search to show all of the dimensions that we've completed our audit on. We can insert that list as well. And then finally, our checklist. Checklist we haven't really talked about yet, but essentially we've built a series of custom lists and searches that are more of like a health check type of a situation for your model. So things like documentation quality, objects that aren't documented. We can also look at some model checks if we have rules without skip checks or feeders, for example. And you can set a priority for each of them. So you can select as many of those as you like. And again, just go ahead and click insert. So we have embedded in here a change report, a custom diagram that we saved, a custom search that we saved, and some sort of a health checklist. You can also embed HTML code for things like hyperlinks and things like that. But now what we'll do is we'll come up here and we'll preview our document. So now all of our static text remains the same, just like it would with a Google Doc. But what we see, oh, my change report didn't work. Oh, there it is. Yep. So now we can see our change report. And you can see the exact same thing. And the number of our processes were a little bit different. There's the custom diagram that we saved earlier with the KPI and travel cubes excluded. We had only tagged that one dimension with our tag of the audit being complete. So there's the results of our custom search. And here's our checklist. So we've got, for example, we've got 2 rule scripts not documented. And so these aren't just static text on the page either. So these objects within this document are interactive. So if we want to take a look, okay, we have 2 scripts not documented. You can click on that right from within this document and be able to see the results of where, which rule scripts those are. Now, the other important part of this is that in addition to being interactive, as I mentioned, they're dynamic. So as your model changes, the results of these embedded objects will change with it. So if you come in here and we see in this checklist, for example, rule scripts not documented, you have 2 of them. You go document those, take a new snapshot of the model. you come back into QUBEdocs, come back to this document in your document wiki, and now that's going to show a nice green check mark, and it's going to show the occurrence count to 0 without you having to recreate this document, redo the checklist, really do anything. So these objects that you're embedding within the document wiki are going to be updated as your model updates. If you add a new cube to your model, it's going to show up in this custom diagram unless you've specifically excluded it as well. So, so interactive objects, dynamic objects that will change as your model changes as well. And I think that's about all I have, unless there's any other questions. Otherwise, I will hand it over to Scott to cover our log file search tool.
Awesome. Thanks, Ross. Yeah, I think one of the things that I just want to underscore as far as this part of the documentation, kind of demo, is that we used to, I would say in years past, when we would talk to customers or consultants, we'd say, hey, listen, we have this great tool that'll help you do your documentation. We've stopped saying that completely. We just say we do your documentation for you. That's what we do. We do almost all of the work. You can certainly add value to it, but when it comes to documentation, we're going to reverse engineer your model. We're going to build all the diagrams. We're going to give you the ability to, describe it, to search it, to save those searches, to build your own wiki documentation if you choose. It really turns into a situation where it becomes an extension of your planning analytics model. So the only question I ask people is, if you know where your documentation is, we'd love to have a look at it, but most people, they're like, it's not in such great shape. So they think about giving QUBEdocs a try, and you all have the ability to use it for a month for free, which is great. Now, snapshots is what we've been talking about. Snapshots, because I'm a little bit of a documentation nerd, there's a very specific reason why we use snapshots, because documentation, it's very important to know the way a system looked at a specific time, and then to know exactly how it looked at another specific time so that you can do comparison reporting. If you're constantly streaming a little bit of data in every few seconds or every few minutes or every few days, you really lose the ability to do that kind of important use case of exception reporting, which is really at the core of documentation. You really want to understand the context of your search. You want to understand the context of your comparison, or even the context of your exploration. You may decide that you want to look at the way the model looked last quarter because you're about to build some new items in your planning model, and you really want to look at the way you did it the last time because maybe that part of the model isn't the same anymore. So context is everything. But what happens when you want to know what happened between snapshots? That's the next part of the conversation. So the place to find that information is, it's the conversation between the client and the server. All of that information is stored in a log file, and the log file is called the server log, otherwise known as the messaging log. And what it does is, every time the client asks for something, the server responds, and it just basically tracks line by line all of those requests and whether or not they succeeded. And so we built a log file analysis utility to fill that gap between snapshot 1 and snapshot 2. So for the 24 hours between your snapshots, you'll still know what was going on. So I'm going to switch over to that part right now. Now, if I'm going to go into QUBEdocs and I've got all my documentation snapshots here, you have the ability to capture the logs for any one of these models. So I'm just going to do one right here on the MyBI. We've got a copy of MyBI up, and we have some test data in there. So I'm going to go ahead and analyze the log files for it. Now, what's happening is it's reaching into a big data store. It's pulling out about a week's worth of log files, and it presents you with a dashboard. We have 6 different dashboards, but it's going to start on this basic server activity dashboard. Now, the server activity dashboard's kind of, we call it a Swiss Army knife, right? It's got a lot of little tools in one package. So it gives you the ability to see all of the messages, all of the log lines, you know, kind of across a timeline. It's broken down across logging levels and logger types, and here are the actual lines of the log themselves. Most people, when they come in and they look at a tool like this, what they're really looking for, just tell me what went wrong, right? Just show me the errors. With one button click, you can literally see every error that happened in the last week. Not only can you see it, but you can see it across the timeline. So you can understand if there are spikes, if there's errors happening at different times. You can further filter that and say, I just want to see my ETL process. I want to see those TI processes that are loading data into my model. I want to see if any of those are failing. So I can just filter on that. And now we get an even more refined view. So now as I look at this timeline, I can see that there's a couple of spikes. So I see a spike right here. It's about 15 errors have occurred, all roughly in the same period of time. I really want to dig into that, but I'm not sure where they're at here in this list. So one of the nice things about the way we built this is that when you click on this, it's going to reload the page just for those 15. So now we're only looking at those 15, and we can really see that that cascade of errors all started somewhere up here, and there's only 2 log lines, so I'll click on that, and now I'm down to 2 possible error messages that started off the total of 15. So instead of chasing 15 different errors that could have happened, they may all started with one particular error. So the use case or the process that I'm going through is called root cause analysis. So I'm trying to understand what was the root cause of the error or whatever it was. Well, we have to first identify what that root cause is. Now, there's a bit of a problem here, and the problem is I've kind of gone down a rabbit hole. So I'm not sure what's happening before or after anymore these particular log lines. I mean, I certainly have identified them in time, but I don't have memorized in time what all the other things that were happening at that time. So one of the things we can do is we can drill into the deep down details of these error messages. And in TM1, it'll spawn a separate error log file when a TI has a failure. And so we show you where that actual log file is. We show you the message inside of it, so you don't have to go find it, but you do have it documented. Most importantly, though, we give you context back. By clicking View Surrounding Documents, this allows you to see all of the messages, not just the errors, but the info messages and the warnings that happened just before and just after that particular error occurred. So here you can see, you can load as many lines as you like, and you can kind of go back in time and rewind that conversation between the clients and the servers to see what initially caused that particular error. This use case, again, is called root cause analysis. And we built this dashboard specifically for being able to navigate and browse from larger groups of errors down to smaller, down to smaller, down to the root cause of what's happening. Oftentimes when you fix that lead error, all of the rest of them clear up. So that's one of the big use cases for this particular dashboard. Now, the second use case for this dashboard is the search engine. So I mentioned we have a big data store. We also have a big data search engine built on top of that data store. So it's very fast, it's very flexible. For instance, I might just type in what changed last week. And by typing the word changed, because changed is a keyword in the log file, I'll automatically see a small report of every single dimension that changed over the last week. And I also noticed that Michael changed some dimensions, and I'm not even sure if Michael should even be in the system. So I just want to see what else Michael has been up to. So I'm going to go ahead and search for Michael's username. Now I see a full list of everything that Michael's been up to in the system, a complete audit just by typing in his username, which is really useful. Now Michael has been complaining that the server is a little slow to start, but nobody else has been complaining about it. And so I'm just, just to see what's going on with that, I'll type in the word start and time and see if I can kind of get an idea of what's going on. Well, I find every occurrence of the word start and every occurrence of the word time. It's not entirely useful. I could certainly read through this for a while, but I can filter this even further down by the server. And now that I've filtered it down by the server itself, I get a really nicely structured report that shows me when the session started, for the restart, how long it took, when it actually happened. And I see 33 seconds, 182 seconds, 34 seconds, 40, 32, 26. Okay, so just by quickly glancing at this, I see that 182 seconds is an outlier. So I want to dig into that. I want to perform a little root cause analysis. So I look at the details. Now, this isn't really helping me much. I still know it's 182 seconds, but I want to view those surrounding documents. So I'm going to load a few above and below and just try to see what was happening before that happened. Well, here I see a chore registered, the big daily data load happened, and then registering the big save data right after that error message and the server restart, and then Michael, trying to log in over and over and over again. And so this might be a user training issue. This might be an issue with Michael's account or maybe a process that he's running. So very quickly, we can, by using the tool to have a conversation with the log file, we can see everything that happened, narrow down on the root cause, and quickly get to remediation, sometimes in minutes as opposed to days or weeks. So that's one of the big values of having the log file analysis dashboard integrated with the filters and the search all together. Now there's 4 other dashboards I'll show you very quickly. We have a process history dashboard. Now this one is really focused on your TI processes, it's sometimes called the ETL script, how you get your data in, how you load things into your model itself. Now it's really important that we monitor any errors, and so what this is like a health check in a box. It shows you your longest running processes, it shows you your most frequently used processes, it certainly shows you the profile of any errors that might be occurring. And there's a bunch of other information on this dashboard that'll help you kind of navigate and negotiate what, where that process was spawned from. Being able to use a dashboard like this really helps you have a kind of a constant health check on those TI processes, and it'll help you keep the kind of green, your model in the green state more often, so that the work that's being done on it isn't reactive and fixing things, but it's more proactive, building new assets. We have a similar dashboard just for the chore history. It looks exactly the same and works almost exactly the same. And then we have a couple of user activity dashboards. Now the user activity dashboards, one of them is focused a little bit more on who's logging in, when, and how often. So it gives you kind of a server profile or an activity profile. You really start to understand when your busy times are, who are your top users, etc. The second dashboard is focused much more on an individual audit. So we talked about Michael being in the system and we weren't sure he was even supposed to be in there. We can drill in and just with a couple of clicks really understand Michael's usage, everything he's been doing in the system, specifically focused on his profile itself. So that's very common to go through maybe a weekly or a monthly IT spot check audit. This allows you to quickly audit your users in minutes every week, and then you can check that off on your IT security policy reports or whatever activities that you might need to do. And finally, we have a little bit of a scorecard built in. It just tracks the kind of the usual suspects. How many times are your servers restarting every week? What is your user login profile? You might be doing an engagement study and trying to roll it out to more people or more planners in your organization. Understanding user logins is really important, especially over time, dimension changes and chores, etc. So that pretty much concludes QUBEdocs demo. We have a little bit of time for some questions, but I'm not entirely sure if you ask a question, if you're going to be able to be unmuted. So do you have the ability to unmute on your end, Belinda?
I can. Let me just try and quickly mute people. If they want to mute them, I'll just unmute them. What I might suggest, it's going to be loud unmuting everyone, is what I just suggest is if you have a question, just pop it into the actual chat. And then I can unmute you to ask a question if that works. So if I'm going to unmute everyone, I think we're going to hear so much feedback. So just pop into the question. So there's someone asking a question. Okay. Is there a way to archive the document automatically after a certain period? Like, for example, after 2 months. I understand that we can delete manual using the QUBEdocs manager.
Yeah, currently right now we don't have an archive function. I have talked with the development team about having selective audits. And I believe that they're working on something kind of in the labs. Nothing to share at this point, but currently right now, the archive feature would be to download, or the process would be to go to your snapshots page. You would download an offline copy of the documentation, and then you could store that off on a file server. A little bit of the conversation has really been around, would those archives be stored on our cloud services? Would you want them stored on your own cloud services? Or would you even maybe want them stored in your own data center? So whoever the person was asking the question, it would be great to get a little bit more feedback about your requirements. And I can make sure that we talk with the development team that could potentially go into implementing a new feature.
That was from Ram. I'm just going to unmute you, Ram. Ram, that question came from you. Did you want to just elaborate to Scott?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Yeah, just you can hear me now?
Yeah, I can.
Okay,
Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, I was kind of feel that, we're taking automatic updates every month in the production. So it's been doing for almost like 7-8 months now. So I kind of wonder, it would be a good idea to archive after a certain period, I can go into the manager and manually delete them, which I feel which one is too old and kind of, but it's good to archive because anything less older than 2 months is not really valid anymore. We might have changed dramatically over the 2 months. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So currently we don't have an archive function, as I mentioned. What I can tell you is that what other users do is they take daily snapshots, and then they usually save one per month. So either daily or weekly, depending on how frequently your model changes. The dailies are really intended to do break fix support during heavy development times. The weeklies obviously are more for audits. Usually when you're doing an audit, you're doing from week to week. And then when you're trying to save your archive version, we recommend that you keep those snapshots right in the database, because what that allows you to do is it allows you to build document wikis that span a period of time but show you amount of change. So there are a few use cases that will go back further in time, so it would, it doesn't take a lot of storage on our end to store a snapshot until you get into the thousands. But the archive feature that you recommended has been asked for by some other users as well. And one of the questions that we had is, where would you, Ram, as a user, where would you plan to archive that off to? Would you plan to archive it right in our cloud services so that you could restore it back into the database at some point? Would you archive it as a offline document on your own cloud service somewhere else, maybe like a box.com or an Azure storage blob? Or would you bring it back into your data center? Do you have an idea of how you might want to do that?
Yeah, Scott, unfortunately we don't have a the cloud version, but we do have a local version. What I feel would be like a, the folder when we install the QUBEdocs that goes in the program files C folder. Yeah, we should have something like an archive folder or something, when we archive from the front end, like in a web page, anything older, that should go into that folder. I know it's gonna pump up that file size and things in a C drive, but which will be more one-off, after a year or so, we can go into that folder and we can delete them, but it also will be greatly helpful when we need at a certain point, what was happened last year, January, so I can also go back and bring it from the C drive, that archive folder, and show it in the web page kind of. But in the web page, it's just going bigger and bigger, like the list going longer. Sure. Just in the web page. But yeah, I'm more than happy to keep them somewhere in a C drive or somewhere. But I'm not really aware of the cloud version because I do have only the local.
So I'd encourage you to check out the cloud version, because there's a couple of features on there that might be of interest to you, as well as log file analysis is available on the cloud only at this point. One of the things that we could talk about, and again, I think we should probably bring this conversation to the development team and talk a little bit about it. We use a file type, we call it our package. It's basically an XML package, which is all the metadata, right? And we ingest that metadata into a SQL database in the background. So your archive options would be to archive off your SQL database. It would be to save a copy of that XML file, what we call the package, which might be the best use case for you based on what I've heard so far. And then, of course, on the cloud version, we've talked about doing like a selective archiving, writing it off to older storage. So at this point right now, what we have the ability to do is to select items. You can multi-select and remove them, delete them completely, and then we recommend saving at least one per month over 24 to 36 months. So it wouldn't be too many items in your. I mean, it might be too many for you, but it wouldn't be too overwhelming the web page or anything. But I'll definitely bring it to the development team and see if they have any options specifically for the local version for archiving.
Thanks, Colin.
Yeah.
Really appreciate that.
Thanks for the question, Ram. There's just a question from Nairi asking, can you please ask if the webinar will be available offline to refer to later? Great question. Yes, we definitely, after this, we have made a recording and we'll just cut out our yabber yabber in the front there about the weather and all sorts. And then we will distribute to everyone that's attended a video recording of this session so you guys can keep that. Thanks for that question. Any other questions? I know, so if there's no other questions, guys, please, we'll follow up after this event. Feel free to email myself or Scott or Ross or Keaton, any of the guys. I'll send my email details, and feel free just to pop us a question and we can answer that for you. Like I said, really appreciate everyone coming online this morning. I know we've all got a lot of crazy stuff to do at the moment, and really I hope this was useful for all of you guys. My favorite feature definitely is the log file analysis. I know that as a developer and a consultant, you spend numerous times going through all those log files to find out what's gone wrong. In our business, it's important, these log files, because you can do a lot more proactive work as opposed to reactive work. What we found, Glenn, our amazing support desk manager, the other day was going through someone's log files and said, I'm seeing this process is taking a long time. I think something's wrong there. It's going to crash. And luckily, we caught it quite early. They were running out of RAM on the specific server. So instead of waiting for the model to crash and then call us and go, it's crashed, what's happened, we were able to do very reactive, put some extra RAM in there, model was done, cleaned out the log files a little bit, and off we went. So really great tool to do that proactive support as opposed to waiting for things to happen, which is important at this time when we're all in there trying to plan quickly. Users can't be offline, and this helps you with that preemptive stuff. Scott, Ross, Keaton, thank you guys so much for putting this on. Really appreciate the time.
Awesome.
And feel free to ask any questions after the session.
Thanks, everyone. It was a
All
pleasure.
right, guys. Have a good Easter.
All right. Happy Easter.